Hi, my name's Dan Metcalfe, founder of Born Superhuman and creator of Total Balance Company. Having the time to speak with you and talk a little bit about balance training, but really about brain to body connections, which is my expertise, is really an honor. On the incredible ability for brain and body connection, for movement, for balance, for freedom, and for longevity in life. In fact, you'd be hard pushed to find anything that has been proven scientifically on its own to impact the quality and longevity of life for 8 years just by having balance and mobility, and this is clinically proven.
2010, in the Journal of Nutrition, Health, and Aging, a very interesting study was done. They looked at 1,300 women who were over the age of 60, and they wanted to see, did balance and gait speed have anything to do with their mortality, their lifespan? And after they controlled for everything else, you know what they found? That those people that had good balance, as tested by the parameters they tested, they had them standing in tandem or tapping their feet, some similar exercises that you do on the 60 up. Those people that had good balance, that had balance at 5 seconds, they lived 7 to 8 years longer than those that did not. Now, that's amazing. And that's a scientific data we have. We're not just talking about this, that there's evidence-based practice here, right? In terms of what's going on. The reality is if I don't have good balance, the world becomes a very dangerous place for me. So the one thing you can do to live longer, take care of yourself.
Before we go into the story and the education of balance and how this is really changing the world, I want to tell you a little bit about my background. Many of you know that I grew up as an athlete and was in show business for many years, but my life of health and wellness for longevity began back in Las Vegas in Lord Andrew Lloyd Webber shows. It was a show called Starlight Express, and during one of the shows I had an accident on stage and I was paralyzed. The doctors told me that I'd be disabled for the rest of my life, but they didn't know me. And even more importantly, we tend to judge the body alone and not the spirit within the body, because we are born to heal. We have incredible powers within us when we unleash the miracle within. And that really is Born Superhuman, where we take what we've been taught and find out whether it was in our best interest. It took me a long time to get back to full mobility. And during that time, I started coaching soccer from a chair. I became a head coach on the Olympic Development Program, had the #1 soccer team in America, have over 40 players that went from youth to pro and put hundreds of kids into Division I schools. And I was really focused after my own injuries on mobility, physical strength, making sure that we're maximizing the potential that our body, our temple offers us. I became Hollywood's expert for the stars with many movies, working with people like Will Ferrell, Robert Duvall, and eventually training people like Shirley MacLaine, amazing lady. During that time, I opened my own sports performance training center, which was about performance using strength, muscles, and power to have everyday activities become more powerful, and for athletes, not just lifting weights, but transferring the power that we have into performance. But during that time, I met a guy called Bob Eubanks. Many of you may know him from the Newlywed Game or the Rose Parade. Bob was in one of these situations where he was falling a lot. He was 79 years old, and I was a master trainer. I had so much experience training so many athletes. I said, let me train you and get your balance back. Now, I did what any great trainer is going to do. Strengthen the legs, strengthen the hip flexors, strengthen the core, and you're going to walk better. Well, within 2 minutes of training Bob, I found out I was 100% wrong. See, I was trying to have Bob do these simple exercises going through speed ladders, and he couldn't do it. He couldn't lift his feet off of the ground, what I call the senior shuffle. So I said, let's put your hands against the wall and start working on lifting your knees. Let's get those hip flexors activated. Well, as soon as his hands went against the wall, his legs were pumping up and down like pistons in a sports car. There was something missing. So I started looking at it and saying it has to be the brain. There has to be a connection between what's happening with Bob when he doesn't have his hands on the wall, when he doesn't feel safe, and as soon as he felt safe, his legs began to work. Well, this is where the science came in. Back in 2018, I had another gift given to me. Let me show you. Coming back from a bike training ride, and a security guard came down on my head, knocked me unconscious immediately. I flew through the air, hit the ground broke open the helmet on the back of my head on the cerebellum. I was unconscious for close to 3 minutes. Now, during that time, part of my brain died. I had to learn to talk again. I had to learn to function. I had to learn to move properly. In fact, I'd be talking and suddenly I would just shut down. People would be telling me, Dan, did you know what happened? I had no clue. With part of my brain dying, I knew I had to take it onto myself to understand the brain. And that's where I really began to focus on how does the brain work. I'd already trained Bob Eubanks on reconnecting the brain and body, but the more I had to understand it for myself, the deeper I dove into the reality of what goes on with balance, mobility, movement, and the incredible ability of the brain to function properly and take on other tasks when a part of the brain dies or is no longer functioning. I've had incredible results, not just for me, but with the 70,000 people that I've trained and told about for brain to body connection. He says, we train the brain, we increase the power of the brain. I didn't realize the adversity that I was going to face in changing what had been accepted, where we're really looking at full risk based on a couple of exercises that really aren't real life. I decided to study, how do babies learn to walk? What's the neurological changes that are going on? When does the proprioception come in from the neural pathways? What's the pressure point relationship to the sensory messaging going back to the brain? And then when we hit the height of our balance and mobility, it's because our brain is fully connected to our body and the messaging so quick that it's part of an almost autonomic system, because you could be walking down the street on a cell phone, looking in a shop window, going, I like that, while there's an argument going on behind you, a dog's chasing a cat, an ambulance is going down the road with a siren on, and at no point do you think of your balance. Slowly, over time, we begin to lose that as we age. When we started addressing neurological issues and had incredible success with Parkinson's, with MS, with ataxia, with stroke survivors, with TBIs, myself using it, but then suddenly we found out Olympic athletes, world record holders were getting even more gains because of the connection of the brain to the body. They could feel what was happening before they actually felt it. They could correct their movement subconsciously and get faster, which gave them more power. So how does it work? When I studied babies and then looked at older people, we realized that the neurological system doesn't change when we age. It just slows down because we're not using it as much, and what I called frayed wiring. Once we start hitting 30 and 40 and 50 and we're becoming more regimented in the way that we do things, it's because we've no longer continued to use the connections in the brain to multitask our movement. And so those parts begin to wither, they begin to fade, the reaction isn't as good, and our pressure point proprioception is not relayed back through the sensory system as quickly to the brain as it did when we were younger. Now, when people say falls are just part of aging, it's not true. What's true is if we don't use it, we lose it. So I'm going to tell you something right now that's a little controversial. It was for me being a head coach on the Olympic development program, muscle memory. People will say, once you do something, you have muscle memory, and that's going to continue to engage the ability of the muscle to move. Well, today, I'm going to tell you that's not true. I'll explain it very simply. A muscle can only move with an electrical impulse. It has to have an electrical impulse and neurons that are firing in the muscle that allow it to move. So what we really have is neuron memory, not muscle memory. When a muscle stops functioning or can't do what it used to do, it's because the neurons are not firing quick enough or directly enough with the information to make the muscle go. Now, there is muscle repetition, there is strengthening of muscle from doing repetitive or resistance action against the muscle. But the actual firing of the muscle is neurons. So we don't have muscle memory, we have neuron memory. So to keep our ability to move and stay balanced and functional and living life, we have to make sure that the neurological pathways and the speed is being governed from the brain to the body or body part, and then back to the brain to tell us, before we're even cognitive, whether the action is safe, whether it's smart, whether it's good, whether I need to adjust and adjust quicker than before we're truly cognitive of the danger of falling. So this is where it gets really interesting. In 2017, Bristol University over in England came up with a study that then went on to peer studies back in 2024, where there's a part of the cerebellum called the pyramis. Now, the pyramis is a form of memory within the cerebellum that when something bad has happened to us and we've had an accident, the brain, which is really created for really, two reasons, to keep us alive and keep us safe, which is really one and the same, now the memory from movement that becomes perceived as danger because of an accident is stored in the cerebellum. And then that message, when the brain begins to get nervous or feel there's a problem, goes to the PAG, the PAG. That then slows us down. Very simple way to explain it. If you walk to the edge of a sidewalk about to cross the road, you can walk fast and you stop because the brain doesn't perceive danger as far as stepping off the sidewalk, especially if there's no cars coming. However, if we are going to the edge of a cliff and it's a 100-meter drop, as we get closer, we begin to slow down, take smaller steps, control our speed. The brain forces the body to slow down. It's a protective system. So once we've had an accident or a fall risk, the brain then begins to slow the body down in movements to protect it. So that's why we get the slow movement. When we live in fear, the body no longer functions because the brain's connection is protecting itself from the potential accident or death. It's not about balancing. It's about having brain-to-body connection. So let me take this a little bit further. What I'd love for you to do right now is stand up, if you will. Now, what I'd like you to do is you can choose your right or left leg. And what I'd like you to do is just stand on one leg, but hold on to the chair or something in front of you. Now, while you're doing that, keep looking at the video, don't look down, and you'll notice you feel very safe. The reason you do is because the hands are engaged on the chair in front and there's no threat to you. In fact, the chair is actually grounding you as much, if not more, from a brain point of view than your actual foot. Now, change feet. Now, let go of the chair. Now, for some of you, you'll notice you'll begin to use your arms, you'll begin to wobble a little bit, but you're under control, you're feeling good, and the brain is now engaged in the proprioception of pressure points in your feet and adjusting. Good. Put both feet back down on the ground because I don't want you to get too tired. Now, what we've done there is we've worked on static balance. Static balance is when you're not moving and you're creating this safe environment from not moving. Now, with the studies that have been done, we know only really 3 parts of the brain are being used when you do static balance that serves no purpose for mobility because you're training yourself not to move. You have the frontal cortex, which is saying don't move, the cerebellum, figuring out how not to move, and the corpus callosum working both sides of the brain, even though you're on one foot, to say this is about not moving. And then I get this dopamine release because look at me, I'm doing great. Serves no purpose when it comes to full risk, because full risk, I would say 98% of the time, is when there's movement or inability to move, to adjust, even when you're standing still. Now, go back on the leg you picked first. Now take your arms out and start moving them around as if you were a tree. We used to even move the other leg if you've got space and see how much out of control you can get without falling. In other words, I've got the freedom to move. Now come to a rest and grab a seat now. Notice that even though we're on one leg, we're now doing dynamic balance. The brain is engaged in feeling different changes of movement instead of stationary, and stationary is what they use as a full risk evaluator. Having trained tens of thousands of people, it's not a waste of time, but it's the most basic beginning that doesn't actually predict full risk. When you were doing the exercise pretending to be a tree or moving around, we had 18 different parts of the brain that are now being engaged. Everything from your hippocampus all the way through to the motor cortex and the sensory, now going back so quickly to adjust and adjust. One of the things that we know with Andrew Huberman, and you will have seen him maybe talk about this, it's pretty incredible. The way to create neuroplasticity is through balance training. Now, the only way the brain can work properly is if it makes errors.
My name is Andrew Huberman, and I'm a professor of neurobiology and ophthalmology at Stanford School of Medicine. It turns out that movement and balance actually provide windows or portals into our ability to change our nervous system. The way to create plasticity is to send signals to the brain that something is wrong, something is different, and something isn't being achieved. Errors and making errors out of sync with what we would like to do is how our nervous system is cued through very distinct biological mechanisms that something isn't going right, and therefore certain neurochemicals are deployed that signal the neural circuits that they have to change. So what happens is when we make errors, the nervous system starts releasing neurotransmitters and neuromodulators that say we better change something in the circuitry. And so errors are the basis for neuroplasticity and for learning. This is where it gets really, really cool. Errors in vestibular, motor, sensory experience, meaning when we are off balance and we have to compensate by looking at, thinking about, or responding to the world differently, cause an area of our brain called the cerebellum to signal some of these deeper brain centers that release dopamine, norepinephrine, and acetylcholine. And that's because these circuits in the inner ear, etc., and the cerebellum, they were designed to recalibrate our motor movements when our relationship to gravity changes, something fundamental to survival. We can't afford to be falling down all the time. If you look at children, they are moving a lot in different dimensions. Whatever sport the kids are playing, or even if they don't play a sport, they tend to move in a lot of different relationships to gravity than adults. As we age, we get less good at engaging in neuroplasticity. Part of that is because as we get older, we tend to get more linear and more regular about the specific kinds of movement. So you sort of have to wonder whether or not the lack of plasticity or the reduced plasticity in older individuals would reflect the fact that those chemicals aren't being deployed because we're not engaging in certain behaviors.
Now, the one other thing that happens here is the brain also has to feel safe. Otherwise, it's going to bring in this pyramus activation to the PAG, and the brain is going to slow you down. That's why the board is so critical to the program that we teach, because the handles on there give the brain a sense of spatial awareness, of safety. Even though the poles are moving with the board, it's incredible how the brain feels safe, even to the point where you can close your eyes and still feel safe. And the brain goes, because I'm safe, I'm free to let the speed of the neurological messaging change. We've done testing where we've put sensors on the brain outside attached to the head and track what's happening to the neuroplasticity. And what we've discovered is for the first 3 or 4 minutes, it's a slow progression of activation. But by the time you hit 10 minutes, you've now got an incredible amount of neuroplasticity that's awake, not just in balance and mobility, but in all areas of learning. And what's even more exciting is once the session was finished, that level of neuroplasticity stayed alive for about 30 minutes after a 25-minute session, which means that the brain's ability to continue to learn, develop, evolve continues far after the training session finishes. Now, for those of you that have seen the board, you'll know a little bit about it. And if you go to totalbalancecompany.com, you'll see a lot more information. We've now expanded Pro 360 is the one for athletes, Neuro 360, which is the neurological program using the board. And many of you may know Dr. Eckel from Energy for Life out in Utah. I'm so proud to say that every single person in his program now gets the board and the program. I go and teach, and last night we had over 100 people live online. And then we have the Balance 360 up, which is a continuation of the aging. And now on the board we have over 300 exercises. We have resistance bands because we want to build an overall body strength for everyday activities, everyday life. And so it's a full, complete program, not just side to side, but we turn sideways and go forward and backwards, so we can control all angles, 360 degrees of the body's need for movement. It's pretty incredible. I'd like you to listen very quickly to Dr. Alen Berger, who will tell you how important balance training is. And as you do this, think of this. Insurance companies are paying around $60 billion a year for full accident recovery. As much as 10% of people will die from a fall, 95% of hip fractures come from falling. And think about how few people recover from hip fractures. Then you've got head injuries. So if we could stop one fall in 70% of those people that are falling for 1 year, the industry would save roughly $40 billion. But more importantly, you're keeping people with a quality of life. And as Dr. Berger would tell you, take a listen.
There is this incredible growth force in all of us that keeps moving us towards what we can be. And you just see it in an infant. It's an amazing thing to watch because it's so raw and naked in an infant, right? Let's get to the balance point. The first step is to pull herself up on the side of the table and let go. She's trying to figure out, how do I keep my body in this three-dimensional plane and be balanced with gravity? And now every time she does that, her brain is learning. If you're trying to 60 up, don't give up if it's difficult. Hang in there, because every time you try, it's changing your brain. It's helping you master that particular ability. So when I feel I don't have this balance, when I don't trust myself, then I'm going to be intimidated. And so pretty soon I'm living out of this space. And we see that so many people become isolated because they don't feel safe leaving their house. So building that balance, building the strengths in these muscles that hold us, can have an incredible psychological benefit, because now a person's going to get their life back. They're going to recover their life. They've lost it for whatever reason because they haven't paid attention to these things. But now they can get their life back. They can recover it, and they can start enjoying a quality of life that they thought was never going to be possible.
I'd love for you to check out my new book, which is right here, Get Your Balance Back. The foreword is actually by Dr. Greg Eckel because of the success and results that he's seen with his hundreds and hundreds of Parkinson's patients. And then over here, we've got Born Superhuman. And I will say we have so many physical therapists that use it, that looked at it and went, it's just a board, until they tried it and they realized it truly is a brain to body development for children with a genesis of the corpus callosum to people 100 years old that are back walking and everybody in between. Thank you so much for gifting me your time. Your power is your brain, your life force is your heart. What a difference we can have, not just in longevity in life, but quality in longevity. Please just go to totalbalancecompany.com and contact me. Thank you.